right, here we go. Bob, I'm trying to remember, can I assume that you were already compiling information about this particular era in Las Vegas history? I know you're, as an historian, you're interested in all of it, but that era in particular, you've been gathering information before the pandemic broke out.
Actually, I started in when I was at Channel 8 in 2005 when we had the bird flu, and so I started doing some research at that point, and we used some of that information. But then it was just fascinating in that there was just very little research that was done. And I don't mean just in Las Vegas and just in Nevada, but once it was gone in 1919, there just didn't seem to be a lot of interest. The war was over, and life was going back to quote normal. But specifically in Las Vegas and Nevada, very little research, a couple of articles. And so I decided that I would, over the next period of months and years and so forth, continue to compile information. So it was at this point now that I decided to sort of put it together. I'm still working on it. And I've uncovered a few things that I'm putting the pandemic in Las Vegas about a month or two earlier than what's currently written.
Oh, so when did it start? How far back does it go?
I believe that the pandemic in Las Vegas really had 4 stages. The first one was in August, mid-August of 1918, when in those days, Las Vegas, if you were able to afford it, and many people did, you left Las Vegas during the summer. You went to Southern California, or you sent your family down there. Well, all those folks started coming back. School was starting. It was getting a little bit cooler in Las Vegas. So the trains were full. And that, of course, was back in 1918 is the primary source of transportation. So they came back to Las Vegas mid-August, and within a couple of weeks, there were reports of the flu. There were reports of very serious flu. And then there was a big public event at the Majestic Theater in late August. And the Majestic Theater, the Golden Nuggets were where the Majestic Theater used to be. Held about 300 people seats. It was a movie theater. There would be political rallies there, those types of things. Well, it was a jam-packed public event, standing room only, about 400 people, and the majority of the cast got sick. Some were unable to show up. And so I traced their names back, and many of those had just gotten back in town from Los Angeles. And one of them that had come back from Los Angeles is Dr. Roy Martin and his family. Both of his wife was the musical director of this community event. His daughter got sick. She got sick. And it, to me, it was August of 1918 rather than October, November, that week, the first stage of the flu.
Reading your article, it looks like a heck of a lot of the movers and shakers at that time, really prominent citizens, got sick. I saw A.W. Ham, and I don't know if that's Artemis Ham or somebody that has a similar name.
No, that is Alta Ham, his wife. She was also in this production, and she also got sick. The mayor got sick. One of the city commissioners got sick. I've now gone back and looked at the city commission meetings in September, October, and November. They were short meetings. They were, with the November meeting is when they ordered everybody in town to wear a mask. But the meeting opened business and then closed. But the mayor was sick, and so was at least one of the city commissioners. It affected every, and surprisingly, as I'm looking at ages, it's 20 to 40. Generally, the influenza hits the older part of the population. Our immune system is not as tight as somebody in their 20s and 30s. But in this case, it was the 20 to 40-year-old bracket.
The Undertaker?
Undertaker. There was also sadly enough, a run on caskets. They didn't have enough caskets. I mean, it hit all elements of our community.
One of the, there's a lot of themes that are sound familiar now, what we're going through now. The confusion in the medical community. Is it the flu? Is it regular flu? Is it pneumonia? The combination of the two, that's when it really becomes deadly.
Well, I think we should give the medical community, certainly in Las Vegas, some slack. This is 1918. Modern medicine hasn't quite caught up. It's not there yet. And I would put more heat on the federal government. We're at war. The federal government has taken charge of the railroad. The federal government has, in many ways, taken charge of the newspapers and the media in the United States. There was an arrangement, there was a committee, a formal committee, and if there's anything that came that looked like it would impact the morale, it may have gotten spiked. And so there was not, while thousands, tens of thousands of our servicemen in camps in the United States are getting sick and many are dying, that's not what you're seeing in the papers. So when you come back to Las Vegas, the doctors here were Roy Martin, they were, I think, really doing the best that they can. To them, it looked like initially the flu. It's the season of the flu, respiratory issues. But then people started getting critically sick, critically ill, and people started dying. And over the next 3 or 4 or 5, 6 weeks, they quickly changed, and this clearly was the Spanish flu.
There's an awesome quote that you start your article with from Dr. S. Lee, where he says this, he's reporting to the Nevada legislature that this thing has hit every village and hamlet, meaning it's spread throughout rural areas as well.
The first stage came to Las Vegas in mid to late August of 1918. It percolated over the next stage was a recognition by our local practitioners that this in fact was not just, quote, the normal flu. This was, as it's now known as H1N1. It was the first one. Later on, they gave it that number. The third phase was the sort of the tapering off, the plateauing in Las Vegas, and that occurred in December. But at the same time, the fourth phase kicked in, and that's the rural areas, Moapa, Overton, Good Springs. It hit those communities in mid to late December. So it started in Las Vegas, and then it spread out.
There's a lot of numbers that are thrown around, and I wondered if you could help us sort of get an idea of how many people lived here and how many people got it. And I know one of the statistics that you quote in there, it delineates between the number of people who had pneumonia and who died. And I think it was 42 got pneumonia and 42 died. That's 100%.
Well, I think one of the things that we have to put a filter on, and I didn't go to medical school, so let's put a quota on that. But this is the respiratory issue, and so the people that died of pneumonia, in my way of thinking, they started with the flu, and the influenza, and it quickly went into the pneumonia. So when I'm counting people, yes, I'm making a list of those that are officially said that they died of influenza, but also I'm making a list of those people that died within that period of pneumonia. And then I'm looking at what I think should be called the fifth phase, and that's when the influenza, sort of about February of 1919, we stopped seeing cases pop up, 1 or 2, but it really had tapered off. Well, for me, stage 5 is the next year and a half, where many people in Las Vegas, including our first district attorney, Thomas, he died about a year later, but he suffered critical ill because of the Spanish flu. It hit the immune systems. Excuse me. can shut off my cell phone, but can't shut off the regular phone.
One of the numbers that was kicked around was 4,000 to 5,000 cases total. Is that for the state or is that Southern Nevada?
No, that wouldn't that would be state number. Our population in Las Vegas was 1918 somewhere around 2,200 people. And again, a significant number of them came back in August. So you had maybe 200 or 300 people that came back from vacation or a 2 or 3 month stay in Southern California.
So there was something like 253 cases in Clark County?
I would, the number that I have from Dr. Lee, and that was in his report to the state legislature, was about 230, 240. But he also said it was likely more. There was no requirement to keep an account of the influenza cases. And those that went from influenza or that had it and became pneumonia, that really wasn't separated out either. So there's,
but I mean, a couple of hundred cases, a couple of hundred cases when there's 2,200 people, that's a heck of a lot of cases.
And a significant, if we're talking, and I would estimate the number of people that died, both based on the numbers that Dr. Lee gave in 1919 to the legislature, and the other numbers that I'm adding to that, I'd say we're close to about 50, maybe 55 people that died. Population of 2,200. That's a lot of people in this community. And it was a former or Commissioner Bale from Good Springs. He died.
I think it's comparable to what we're doing now. We don't really know how many people are infected. We're counting the dead. We don't know how many people died before the count started. And there is confusion now about really how serious it is. And there's confusion about which ones are the regular flu and which ones are the super flu. A lot of comparisons like that from 1918 to what we're doing now. Social distancing, right?
Let me here. The social distancing was really something that I thought was intriguing, and this is from Roy Martin. There were 2 sets of social distancing or rules. One was human beings walking around or at meetings. Another one was on the trains that were controlled by the federal government. There were no rules. There were no screens that were packed with human beings. There was a rule in the signs. It said no spitting, but apparently that was a significant problem because many people ignored that. So spitting apparently was something that occurred in 1918 on a regular basis, at least on railroad trains and in the cars. But this is what what Martin said. Similar as you said today, assist in preventing gatherings and crowds. Do not stand directly in front or close to somebody when you're talking. So if you're talking to somebody, they have to stand over here, which is slightly different than what we have. We're 6 feet. It was 5 feet in those days. They've added another foot. Isolation, quarantine the people, wear a mask, and that was required by the city commissioner. And they arrested a couple of people, took them to court. They weren't wearing a mask. The judge waved his finger at them and sent them on their way. But they were actually arrested and taken to court. Another rule that Dr. Martin, the chief health officer, said was clean out, clean up, and keep clean inside and out, personally and otherwise. Remember, at this time, there was also on the ballot in November prohibition. And those that were opposed, the West that were opposed to prohibition, ran newspaper ads that said you should drink whiskey because it'll help sanitize your inside. Then there was the other one, of course, brush your teeth, gargle your throat, spray your nose with antiseptic solutions. And the last one was beware of some cures, so-called cures. And that is hitting us just today, right in the face. December things are calming down in Las Vegas, but as I mentioned, in Moapa and Good Springs and the outlying communities, they're getting it. School is back. They allow the movie theater to open in December 9th. The school is open. Attendance is a little slow, certainly at the school, but it was noted that attendance at the movie theaters was up in a packed house again. But Roy Martin issued another, and I haven't seen this one today, and it had to do with the fact that he didn't want anybody dancing. Because it was just a real too close a contact, and so we put out an order. There will be no public dancing. So that came to a standstill. So there are a lot of things that the city and the county did, and also we're isolated. We're isolated in here, with the exception of the train. And there was some talk about having guards at the depot and not letting anybody off, but that didn't go to fruition.
I found feels enlightening for the local government to go ahead and say, hey, you got to wear masks. They're got to have masks at the at public meetings, and enforcing the law, as you said. At the time, in other communities around the country, there was a no mask league where people did not want to wear masks. They're going to fight for their freedom, even if it puts other people in jeopardy. Was any of that here organized, or was just?
Well, no. With the exception of 4 guys that were arrested by the city police and taken to jail, there wasn't. This was a small, close-knit community, and everybody, one way or the other, counted on somebody else. We're in the middle of the desert, so there were not. Everybody knew each other. You had a sense of of if your neighbor was sick. Signs were posted on the doors that this is quarantine. Don't let anybody in or out. It was a serious business, and I think the numbers could have been higher, just like today, if the population hadn't adhered to some of these guidelines that are now 100. Actually, they're not 100 years old. They go back to the plague. The way you handled the plague was you separated everybody. So that rule goes all the way back to medieval times.
You know, we've seen the White House for months banging on the news media. Saw these statements this week. If only we had a better, more honest news media, everybody would get along. In other words, you know, if you would just report what we want you to report, this would be much better and we'd be more optimistic. There was sort of false optimism by the media back then, right? Misleading.
I don't think it was. I think the media failed in 1918. And I'll even say they failed in Las Vegas to this degree. You go page by page of the newspapers in October and early November of 1918. You better read the inside stories down on page 3 or 4 to find something about influenza. It wasn't until later the election found this sort of an article on the front page. But in late October, the last 2 weeks in October, and the first week in political news, political ads, commentary, and stories about the war.
So you had indicated sort of there was, at least the media was playing ball with the federal government, not really reporting negative stuff. And I think one of the lines you used, it was the local coverage was more optimistic than factual. So they were trying to see it through rose-colored glasses, get everybody back to normal.
And again, this is 1918. This is not today, to where today we have a lot more scientific information, a lot more experts, a lot more knowledge. We've gone through the bird flu. We've gone through a variety of other things. So the truth, the facts today should be easier to dispense than they were certainly in 1918. But in 1918, we didn't really hear about the tragedies that were going on at our army camps around the country. you had one camp in Arkansas where several thousand people were sick, going to the hospital, many died. And that same week, the Arkansas Gazette in Little Rock said, everything's fine. We have this every year, no big deal. So some of it was ignorance. Some of it was falling in line with what the federal government was saying. But clearly, from what I've read and seen and page by page in some newspapers, I think the media can always do a better job.
I guess it's a matter of lessons learned. There was a lot we could have learned from that if people had paid attention, but people don't pay attention to history. They forget about it.
I think we do that in my lifetime. We try and put that bad news behind us as quickly as we can, and we move forward. I think this is different. I think as much as we want to get back to some normal sense of life, this is not going away. This is now going to become part of our life. Part of our life is what you and I are doing, and that's having an interview through this media. More and more of those things are going to take place. The economy is going to be different. People are going to work differently. We're going to see for the longest period of time, if not from now on, people wearing masks all the time, playing slot machines. I look forward to that. There's the famous stunt that I think one of the PR people at the Sands Hotel, he put a crap game in the swimming pool and had a floating crap game. We're going to see a photograph of people playing craps with their masks on.
1918, as 2020 was an election year. They still had an election, and even though it was the height of the outbreak here, was there any discussion then about postponing it? Was there any discussion of, hey, if we have an election using the normal procedures, people are going to get sick?
The election was bigger than the flu in Las Vegas and in the state of Nevada. You had several hotly contested races, including that for the sheriff of Clark County. The bigger issue, of course, was prohibition. Nevada was going to be one of the early states. This is way before the federal government did it. And I think that, and it passed overwhelmingly in Las Vegas, within the city of Las Vegas and in the state of Nevada. And I think partly due to the flu, partly due to people thinking about health and doing that balance. And they decided at that moment that, now they changed their mind about 1920. Maybe they changed their mind in 1919, but the political was a big issue. You had two newspapers in town. The Las Vegas Age was the Republican paper, and the Clark County Review was the Democratic paper, and they were going at it tooth and nail, and a lot of political ads. And so there was no real question about not going to the polls. Now, I have not, it's a good question. I've not gone back and tallied the number of, I can get the number of people that went to the polls and see how that compares to the registered voters and see, in fact, if there was. But I suspect that since these races were so hotly contested, that most people went to the polls.
Well, I'm just ask it in the context of, we saw what happened in Wisconsin. They wanted to, hey, let's do this by mail instead of putting people's lives at risk. The establishment and the courts say, no, can't do that. Can't use mail-in ballots. You got to show up. At least 7 people that we know of so far got infected because they exercised the right to vote.
Don't know if that data is now. There's one bit of piece of information. We were still going through the draft.
Yeah.
And Roy Martin and the sheriff, who was also on the health department, they were involved in registering and helping the draftees fill out the paperwork. They all met at the Clark County Courthouse. I think it was mid-November, and he canceled it. It was too stuffy. There were too many people in that room, and so they canceled that sort of thing. On the other hand, voting you can stand in line. I mean, there wasn't, or you would drop your ballot in. So I think that there would be more chance for that court sort of social distancing in 19. And the population, roughly 2,200, I would say maybe 1,000 people potentially voted, half the population.
No.
So,
well, it's a great piece, very fascinating. And of course, knowing you, it is a work in progress. It'll never be finished, right?
no, I will. The little piece of information that I'm working on now is where everybody got sick. It was at the Majestic Theater. The Elks put on a minstrel show where the leading citizens dressed up in blackface and put on a show.
Oh. Is there any photos of that?
No.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right.
Can I ask a couple of questions real quick?
Yeah.
Gotcha. So I'm coming off of being a tour guide before this, so I got to sort of an amateur crash course in our history around here. But in your opinion, because I know what's going to happen here in the States, we're going to, 2 years from now, outside of, there might be some norms that are changed, but for our day-to-day, we're going to be moved on. We're going to forget about it. When did they forget about it? That crowd, the 1918 folks, was it a year later? Was it 10 years later? When was that out of the psyche of Americans? Do you think?
Well, I'm not sure about the population of Las Vegas, but let me just answer your question. For Las Vegans, within 6 months, and the picture you see behind me now is Las Vegas a few months after the pandemic hit, and it was taken from the first airplane in 1920 that flew over Las Vegas. A few months later, 1921, massive strike in Las Vegas. That sort of washes away what occurred yesterday. So as far as the memory of the flu in Las Vegas, I think folks were still dying. We're still suffering from the flu for the next year, next 18 months. But then Las Vegas was looking towards the future, and there was already discussion about this idea of building a massive dam on the Colorado River. So they saw that as a future. So there was more looking forward than looking behind.
And in your opinion, what do we see today, or is there anything in Vegas or this area, Southern Nevada, that we see today that directly goes back to that's why we do this way? Is there anything like that? Like we might in 50 years say, yeah, that's why we all wear masks. But is there anything that is a remnant from this in the Vegas area?
Only in the broadest sense of what we are today, and that's an open community, an independent community, a community in many ways that's separate from the rest of the country through most of its life, through its hospitality industry, through the dam, bringing tourists in. We have sort of set our own rules and gone our own way. I think it's clearly today that's not going to work, because Las Vegas, with its 20, 30, 40 million visitors, that's who is going to be coming to town. So we now have to be part of the bigger story. We have gambling, we have all those things that are going on, but so do a lot of other communities around the country. I don't think there's anything specific that 1918 that we're doing today, other than over those decades, the openness of Las Vegas. That's who we are today.
And along those lines, if a late 1918 person were to show up today, this whole question of what would they tell us? What lesson didn't we learn?
Well, I'm not sure. Not sure that there are that many, there are specific lessons that we haven't learned. I think that the location of the community in the northern edge of the Mojave Desert and the southern tip of the Great Basin still plays a big role in who we are and how we live. No air conditioning then, we have air conditioning now, but those you can match. But as far as what have we learned, 1918 Las Vegas was not quite wide open, but was an open town. But again, the community was based on its key population base, which was 300-400, most of them single men who worked for the railroad. And that money rolled over three or four times. And so we were a bit of an open town. But then we voted for prohibition. As I'm babbling here, trying to come, I'm not sure.
Oh, that's all right.
But as I nod off tonight, your question will, and I'll pop up about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to call you.
Feel free.
Well, one lesson would be don't shoot up bleach. That would be a good one. And we have so much heat here. You'd think we'd never have the flu since the heat kills the flu, right?
Well, the heat and what was the other one I read? The heat and although that there is some elements of that, but you know, we are talking. We say the flu. There's all kinds of flus. You know, and there's all these H1N. We've had these things over the years. I think all of us, the population in general, we are all going to become a little bit healthier. That's my hope, that we'll all become healthier, we'll take care of ourselves better. And I really want to think that way.
Well, I hope nobody proposes prohibition again. Thanks, Bob.
All right.
Thank you very much. It was nice meeting you.
Okay, I'm going to get back to have fun playing with Zoom here and learning how to use this thing.
Love your
Maybe
background.
send me a couple of photos.